I'm a lost and found clerk at a cemetery. Someone's returning things that should stay buried. I'm a lost and found clerk. Not at a mall or airport, at a cemetery. You might laugh, but I'm being serious. The cemetery is over 100 acres, mostly forgotten, and my little office sits near the rusted north gate under a sign that reads, "Inquiries." The city technically owns the land, but no one's updated the paperwork in decades. My job is simple: catalog anything left behind, umbrellas, purses, letters, and occasionally things people shouldn't be leaving near graves. You'd be surprised what grief makes people discard. But recently, someone's been returning things. And not items the living forgot. Items the dead were buried with. It started 3 weeks ago, on a rainy Monday morning. I arrived to find a velvet ring box on my desk. At first, I assumed it had been dropped by a mourner. But when I opened the log to enter it in, I noticed something odd: the name scribbled next to it, in tight cursive. Margaret Whitley. Plot 19D. The thing is, Margaret was buried 3 years ago. And I remember her clearly, because her husband had practically begged us to let him bury the ring with her. It was this gaudy Victorian piece with a cracked garnet, supposedly passed down from her grandmother. He said she never took it off. I checked the records. Sure enough, it was listed in her burial inventory. I even remember seeing it on her finger when they wheeled her in. Now here it was, neatly cleaned and sealed, like someone had gently twisted it off her corpse and dropped it on my desk. The next week, it was a locket. Then a child's shoe. Then an old dog collar with the tag still dangling. All with names. All matched to the dead. Some had been underground for decades. The dirt and rot on the leather, the way the engraving had faded with time, it wasn't staged. These weren't replicas. Someone was digging them up and putting them back into circulation. And each time, they left them in the same place, centered on my desk, with no sign of forced entry. No security footage. No footprints. Just the item. And always with a little handwritten note tucked beneath it that read, "This was never theirs to keep." I went to my boss, but he laughed it off. Said someone must be messing with me. But no prankster digs 6 feet down into sealed vaults to retrieve a mummified baby's pacifier. I filed a police report. They came, looked around, shrugged, and left. That night, I stayed in the office. Just to see. I kept the lights off, cracked the door, and waited with a thermos of bad coffee and a flashlight. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. Not footsteps. Dragging. Like someone pulling something heavy across wet grass. I peeked out the window, and what I saw still turns my stomach. There was a shape, tall, thin, and moving with a strange, shivering gait. It wasn't wearing anything I could call clothes. Just dark folds of something clinging to it like seaweed or funeral fabric soaked in rot. It didn't walk to the door. It melted into it. And when I looked back at the desk, there was a stuffed rabbit, soaked and torn, its fur stained yellow with time. The tag on its ear said, "For Evelyn. Always." And Evelyn Barrow died in 1979. I tried to quit the next day. Packed up my things, left my key, and never looked back. But the night after I left, I woke up to find an envelope on my kitchen table. Inside was a folded inventory sheet. From a grave we buried just 2 weeks ago. A man named Curtis Bell. I remembered him because his daughter had placed a sketch he drew as a kid inside his suit pocket before the casket closed. That drawing was in the envelope. Along with another note. "You owe him. Return what was taken." I haven't gone back to the cemetery, but it doesn't matter. Things are still showing up. On my doorstep. In my mailbox. Once, on the passenger seat of my locked car. Items the dead were buried with. Items I'd forgotten. But someone, something, hasn't. I think it's counting down. Like I've taken something too. Something I can't remember. And now it's just a matter of time before it comes to return me. After all, I was the one who used to catalog the dead. And the dead? They never forget who kept their things. That sentence kept repeating in my head as I drove aimlessly that night, trying to put miles between me and my apartment, the cemetery, and whatever was delivering the dead's forgotten artifacts to me. I'd left my phone behind, some ridiculous instinct to not be traced, as if this thing used GPS. It didn't. I ended up at a gas station 20 miles out, sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles cracked. The gas station attendant gave me a strange look when I asked if they had security footage, just in case someone followed me. He said they did, but when I came back 20 minutes later after pacing behind the building, the guy looked spooked and pale. He said the camera above Pump 4, where I had parked, showed nothing. No car. No movement. Just a black rectangle in the footage, as if I had never arrived at all. He tried to laugh it off, but he kept glancing past me, like something else had come in behind me. I stopped sleeping after that. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see rows of tombstones, but not as they were when I worked there. They were closer, somehow. Crowding in, bending forward like they were leaning to listen. In some dreams, I was in the office again, cataloging, but the entries wouldn't stop coming. Hundreds, thousands of items slipped sliding from the printer with no end in sight, each one naming me as the custodian of unreturned goods. In the dreams, I wasn't human anymore. I was part of the cemetery, stuck behind the desk forever, just another clerk between the living and the rot. Then the third envelope arrived. It wasn't left at my apartment. It was tucked into the back pocket of my jeans. I hadn't felt it there all day. It was small, almost child-sized, folded twice over, sealed with a black wax stamp that pulsed slightly when I touched it. Inside wasn't a note this time. Just a photo. Grainy and yellowed, like it had been sitting in soil for decades. But I recognized the person in it. Me. Younger, maybe 15 or 16. Kneeling at the base of a headstone I didn't recognize. I was holding something, a small wooden box, and grinning as I tucked it into the roots beneath the grave. I dropped the photo like it burned and spent the next hour tearing through every photo album I owned, every social media post, every journal. I found no record of that day. No memory of that box. But the feeling in my stomach told me it had happened. And worse, that I'd buried something that wasn't mine. So I went back. I don't know why I thought it would help. I didn't even have a key anymore, but when I reached the old gate, it creaked open like it had been expecting me. The air was thick, not just foggy, but almost wet with silence. No birds. No wind. Just the slow, dragging sound of something heavy moving deep among the graves. I made my way toward the office, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand, but the windows were smashed. The walls were caved in. Something had broken in, or maybe out. Inside, the desk had been flipped, papers scattered like leaves, and on the floor was that velvet ring box again. Except now, it was open. The ring was gone. And in its place was a note, soaked red down the center, barely legible. It said, "You owe 39. The number made my skin crawl. I didn't know what it meant, but I couldn't stop thinking about that word, custodian. I wasn't just handling items. I was keeping them. Hoarding them. Letting grief-stained objects pile up in an office that had become more tomb than workplace. And now, apparently, I was 39 items in debt. That's when I started seeing them. Not clearly at first, just out of the corner of my eye. Figures standing between the headstones at night, always facing me. Sometimes they looked like people I'd known. Sometimes like shadows made of fog and rotten cloth. Once, I saw a figure crawl out of a grave I knew for a fact had been sealed since 1962. It didn't scream. It didn't run. It just walked calmly toward the gate and vanished. They weren't ghosts. Ghosts were stories. These were something else. Something physical. Angry. Incomplete. People tied not to the land, but to their stolen pieces. Their lost rings, their lockets, their rabbits and drawings and shoelaces. Grief didn't die with the body, I understand that now. It lingers. And when you take something with it, when you steal a relic of remembrance, it twists the grief into hunger. Tonight is different. I'm writing this from the back of a borrowed truck parked outside the cemetery. The last item was returned, an old photograph I found in a sealed drawer months ago. I thought it was trash. It was wedged in the back of a cabinet with mold curling the edges. But when I dropped it at the grave it came from, a cracked headstone with no name, just the date of death, the wind stopped. The silence thickened. And I felt watched, but not with malice. With accounting. I owe one more. But I don't know what it is. I think that's the final test. Not what I stole. But whether I remember what I buried. If I don't, they'll come for something else. And they won't be asking for rings or photos this time. They'll be asking for me. That line echoed inside my skull as I stared through the cracked windshield of the truck, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I'd locked the doors. Pulled a threadbare blanket over myself like it could somehow protect me. But nothing keeps them out. You start to realize that once the rules begin to shift. Doors, locks, borders, roads, none of them matter. They're for the living. And the living don't get to make the rules anymore once they start keeping what the dead gave up. The air around the cemetery began to change as midnight passed. It thickened, like fog mixed with iron filings. My vision blurred slightly, like I was underwater but hadn't noticed until now. The headstones out there weren't still. I swear to God, they weren't still. They were leaning, bending toward me like the entire graveyard had taken a collective breath in anticipation. Somewhere out in the dark, I could hear dirt being moved, slowly and deliberately. A shovel scraping bone. But it wasn't someone digging down. No. Something was digging up. The truck started shaking, subtly at first. Just a tremble in the tires. Then more violently. Like something massive was rising beneath it. I scrambled out, falling into the grass, and when I looked back, the tires had sunken 2 inches into the earth. No hands had reached out. No ghostly face pressed against the window. But the vehicle was being claimed. Pulled. Absorbed into something that no longer recognized it as belonging to this world. I didn't wait to see what would come next. I ran. Stumbled through the wrought iron gate, which was now wide open, and into the cemetery. I don't know why I ran toward the graves. Maybe I thought if I found it, that last item I'd taken, I could still give it back. Bargain with the thing I owed. Trade one last memory to avoid becoming one. But the cemetery was different now. Paths that once led to familiar rows of stones now twisted into strange spirals. Names on headstones flickered like dying neon signs, some in languages I didn't recognize, others in mirrored English, letters jumbled like anagrams written by someone trying to fake humanity. At one point, I turned and saw my own name etched into a stone that hadn't existed moments earlier. Beneath it, the words, unclaimed. Custodian. I screamed. I begged. I tore at the dirt with my bare hands, trying to remember, trying to force the lost memory back into being. What had I buried? What had I stolen from the dead so long ago that even my own mind wouldn't face it? But the ground didn't care. The night didn't care. And then, through the crooked headstones, I saw them. Dozens of them. Shapes. Pale, shivering figures, glowing faintly like frost in moonlight. Not skeletal. Not monstrous. Just hollow. The kind of hollow that screams with silence. They stood motionless, staring with eyes that looked carved into their faces, too deep and too wide, holding grief like a physical weight. They began to move. Not toward me, toward the center of the graveyard. They circled it, slowly, ritualistically, as if reenacting something ancient. And in the center, rising from the ground like it had been waiting, was a table. Wood-rotted black. Carved with hundreds of names. Atop it, wrapped in decaying velvet, was a single box. I knew what it was. Not because I remembered, but because everything told me I should. That box was mine. I took it when I was a teenager. Buried it beneath someone else's grave because I thought it didn't matter. Because I was angry. Because I didn't want to let go of the person it once belonged to. I stole something that belonged with the dead and buried it somewhere it didn't belong. And that box, whatever it contains, is why they're here. I stepped forward. The air burned my throat. Every part of me wanted to run, but I knew there was no point. This wasn't about running. This was an audit. And I was the final entry. As I reached out, the figures drew closer. Their presence wasn't violent, it was mournful. They watched, almost reverently, as I lifted the lid of the box. Inside was a single item, a necklace. Rusted, broken at the clasp. I remembered it then. It had belonged to my grandmother. I wasn't supposed to take it when she passed. My mother told me it was meant to be buried with her. I took it anyway and never wore it. It had been sitting in a drawer for years. And somehow, I'd forgotten it. Until now. As I closed the lid and placed it back on the table, the ground beneath me sighed. Not a wind. Not a tremor. A sigh, like something ancient had exhaled. The dead stopped moving. Their heads tilted upward. And I understood. It wasn't about the necklace. It was never about any of the items. It was about respect. About remembering that some things are meant to stay gone. That death isn't just an ending. It's a contract. A threshold you don't cross, not even with fingers, not even for keepsakes. And I had broken it. They didn't drag me away. They didn't need to. When I stepped away from that table, I was different. The sky above no longer looked like sky. The stars blinked in patterns I couldn't read. And the cemetery no longer had paths. Just doors. Dozens of them, carved into mausoleums, trees, even the backs of tombstones. And I knew one of them was for me. I'm not writing this from the world you know. I'm writing from the archive. The in-between. The place where the unreturned are kept. Where I am kept. I still hear footsteps sometimes, the next clerk, probably. Maybe you. Because this job doesn't post openings. It leaves them. And now, I'm the one watching. Waiting. Counting down the inventory. Waiting for the one who forgets just one item too many. Waiting for you.